NASCAR announces upgrades and penalties that include playoff bans. Kyle Busch completes sensitivity training, and the Xfinity Series field is expected to increase in size from 36 to 38 cars. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We've got a ton of NASCAR story to discuss here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. The first thing we're going to talk about is all the paint schemes. We've got a lot of paint schemes to take a look at. The first paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Tim Hill's 2022 Cobalt Enterprises scheme that we're going to see in the truck race at Daytona. This paint scheme looks really good in my opinion. They did a really good job with the color variations of the yellow and the blue. It's a really nice looking paint scheme, and I'm definitely looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack at Daytona. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Tyler Reddick's 2022 Guaranteed Race scheme that we're going to see throughout the 2022 NASCAR Cup Series season. I really like this paint scheme a lot. The only issue I have with it is the fact that there's two logos on the car. Again, they do a really good job utilizing a sponsorship placement, but one thing I would change overall is the fact that there's so much use. There's two different sponsors, but it's pretty good paint scheme in my opinion. I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Kyle Busch's 2022 M&M scheme in their final season with Kyle Busch. I really like this M&M scheme. There's things I definitely would change with it for sure, but one thing is, one, the sponsorship placement. Number two, the numbers in a really good position, and the paint scheme looks really nice. One of my favorite M&M's paint schemes that I've seen so far, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s 2022 My Foods / Slim Jim scheme that we're going to see in the Busch Clash and other races throughout the season. This paint scheme is pretty good in my opinion. I will say it is a little bit bare, but they don't have to sometimes have that much on the car. I think the number placement is in a really good position, and they do a pretty solid job overall in this paint scheme, and I'm looking forward to see it on the racetrack at the Busch Clash. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is both of Cody Worth's 2022 NERC schemes. In the day races, he'll run a purple scheme, and in the night races, he'll run a black scheme. This paint scheme looks really good in my opinion. Will be on the car for him all season, and also for Takuma Sato in IndyCar as well. I think it's a really nice looking paint scheme. They did a really solid and a really great job on it, and I'm looking forward to seeing the paint schemes out on the racetrack in 2022. They look pretty good, to be perfectly honest with you. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Kevin Harvick's 2022 Mobile One scheme. This is definitely one of my favorite next-gen paint schemes that have been revealed so far. Stewart-Haas Racing has done an excellent job when it comes to paint schemes, and this one is no exception. They did a really good job in it. It's a really nice-looking paint scheme. The Pegasus is back. One thing I've always liked about Mobile One paint scheme, especially the Pegasus, so they did a good job on it, and I'm looking forward to see it out on the racetrack in 2022. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Noah Gragson's 2022 Cure Token scheme that we're going to see in the Cup Series race at Kansas in the fall. And then again, I don't know much about crypto, but it's cool to see that a sponsor is working with Noah Gragson. I think it looks really cool. I like the orange on the car and the white, the contrast in the car looks really great, and I'm looking forward to see this on the racetrack in 2022. It looks pretty badass, to be perfectly honest with you. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Justin Allgaier's 2022 Brandt scheme. Paint scheme looks very good in my opinion, and one thing I really like is that the number is going to have the corn shape on it. The corn, they've been wanting the corn on the car for the Brandt schemes. It's really cool to see that they're going to be allowing that. I think that overall is very awesome, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. And the final paint scheme I believe we're going to be taking a look at as of now is Miguel Paludo's 2022 Brandt scheme. Really good in my opinion. I will say it's not as good as the Justin Allgaier one, but I think it looks really cool. I like the variation to do for the car. It's a really nice looking scheme. There are things I definitely would change for it for sure, but it looks pretty good in my honest opinion. I think they did a really good job on it, and I'm looking forward to see this paint scheme out on the racetrack in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to all the other major stories discussed here today on the channel. The first story we're going to talk about is the Dover Cup Series race, as they have a new title sponsor for the Dover Cup Series race. It's going to be called the Duramax Dryden 400. I believe the race has been called the Dryden 400 for the last couple of years now, and it looks like Duramax is going to be stepping up the plate to sponsor the race. Really cool to see that Duramax is coming on to basically work with them this year. I think it's really cool, and I like the name of the Duramax Dryden 400. I mean, it would have been cool just to say Dryden 400, but it's really cool to see that Duramax is going to be sponsoring this race in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode. We're talking about Market Rebellion. as Marco Rebellion is going to be sponsoring Alpha Prime Racing for 7 races in 2022. I don't remember exactly which races they're sponsoring, but it's cool to see that Marco Rebellion is working once again with Tommy Joe Martins in 2022. They had a relationship with them, I think, in 2020 and 2021, and now they're joining Alpha Prime Racing once again in 2022. Paint scheme also, not to mention, looks really, really good. They did a really, really great job on it, and I'm looking forward to see what they can do with the sponsorship on the car. I think it looks really, really solid, really, really awesome. I'm looking forward to see how they will do with this paint scheme in 2022. And now to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Vega LLC, as they're going to be sponsoring JTG Doherty Racing's pit crew in 2022, and they will also at some point sponsor the 47 car in the 2022 season. I think this is the first. I don't remember if there's ever been a time where pit crew has ever been sponsored, so that absolutely is really, really crazy. But it's cool. Again, they don't have a lot of following to on social media, so if it's unclear if they're really, really trustworthy or not. But at the same time, I think it's really awesome to see that Vega LLC is coming in and sponsoring them, and hopefully they can come on, and hopefully the car they bring is cool. It's just interesting that they've got a pit crew that's being sponsored by them in 2022. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Moose Fraternity. As the Moose Fraternity is coming over from Chip Ganassi Racing over to Trackhouse Racing, and they're going to be sponsoring Ross Chastain for 4 races in 2022. They'll sponsor him at Talladega in the spring, Worldwide Technology Raceway, Richmond, and Martinsville. Multiple of Ross Chastain's other sponsors have already come on and worked with him. Avanhove will be a sponsor for him in 2022. And I think overall it's really, really awesome to see that the Moose Fraternity is going to continue their overall partnership with them heading into next year. I think that's something that's really, really cool. It's one thing that I really, really love is the fact that you've got these other old sponsors that are coming to work. So I think it's awesome. I'm glad to see that they're working with them once again in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Advanced Auto Parts. As Advanced Auto Parts is going to be sponsoring Ryan Blaney for 4 races in 2022. They'll sponsor Martinsville, Darlington, Nashville, and Daytona. Advanced Auto Parts has sponsored Ryan Blaney for the last couple of years now, so it's no surprise that they are continuing their partnership with Ryan Blaney heading into this season. Overall, I think it's really, really awesome, and it's great to see that they're going to continue sponsoring Ryan Blaney 2022. I think having a company like that, being able to work with them heading into next year, I think is something that overall is extremely awesome. And overall, I'm very, very happy to see that they're continuing to work with them heading in 2022. I think it's perfectly great and perfectly awesome, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Las Vegas tentative schedule, as this is what the Las Vegas tentative schedule will look like so going into the weekend. So, on Thursday at the Las Vegas weekend, the truck practice and qualifying is going to take place. Remember, practice qualifying is going to be happening both at the same time. Then on Friday, Xfinity Series practice and qualifying is going to take place, followed by the Truck Series race in the evening. Then on Saturday, the Cup practice qualifying is going to take place, and then that'll be followed by the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, and then Sunday will be the Cup Series race. This is not shocking me that this is the way they're going to be doing things from now on. It's very interesting. This is the way they're going to be doing it, and it's definitely pretty interesting for sure that you've got the Vegas schedule looking like that. So I think that's pretty awesome. I'm glad to see that that is the Las Vegas schedule heading the weekend. That will be what it is. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Phoenix tentative schedule. So, on Friday, the ARCA race is just going to be ARCA altogether, practice qualifying, and then it's going to be the ARCA race. Then on Saturday, both Xfinity Series and the Cup Series will have practice and qualifying, and then the Xfinity Series race is going to take place. And then on Sunday, it'll just be all the Cup Series. No surprise here, to be perfectly honest with you, that is what the tentative schedule is going to look like. There's going to be a lot of action on the racetrack throughout the year. There are some races where it's going to be different, but I think that this is overall a pretty good tentative schedule that they've got going on for them. It's pretty awesome, pretty cool, and I'm glad to see that is what's going on for that heading into next year. I think that's perfectly honest, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Vegas Hauler Parade. As the Vegas Hauler Parade is officially returning in 2022, and it will take place on March 3rd at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Really, really cool to see that the Vegas Hauler Parade is returning here in 2022. Of course, the Vegas Hauler Parade has been something that's been involved in NASCAR for many, many years. I think they have not had it for the last couple of years due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but with everything slowly starting to maybe open up a little bit more, it definitely definitely makes a lot of sense why the Vegas Heart Parade once again is going to happen next year. Overall, I think that's really, really exciting, really, really great, and I'm happy to see that the Vegas Heart Parade is coming back in 2022. I think having a comeback is really, really great, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carl Edwards. Now, we've talked about Carl Edwards a couple times on this channel, but Carl Edwards has sent a really nice letter to Julie Stefanik, who got to speak at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And Carl Edwards says some really, really nice and really, really kind words about Mike Stefanik. That's how you know Carl Edwards is a really, really good person. Of course, some people will disagree with me because he turned Brad Keselowski in 2010, but I think that Carl Edwards is a class act of an individual and a class act of a driver, and he continues to prove it on a week-by-week basis by sending letters, among other things, over to people. So I think that's something that's really cool, and I'm happy to see that he sent that letter. I think that's a great letter that he sent overall to him, and I'm happy about that he sent that letter. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Rolex 24 TV schedule. Of course, this weekend is going to be the Rolex 24, and here's everything you need to know about the TV schedule. So, the race is going to start at 1:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. is going to be on NBC. The race, I think, officially starts at 1:40 Eastern, but it will kick off then. Then, at 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m., you'll have to go over to Peacock to watch the race. By the way, Peacock will be streaming the whole event throughout the weekend. Then at 4 to 7, it will be on USA Network. Then from 7 to 10, it'll be on Peacock. And then from 10 to 12 a.m., will be on USA. Then from 12 to 3 a.m. will also be on USA. Then from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. will be on Peacock. Then from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. it will be on USA. And then the final 2 hours of the race will take place at NBC. Really cool tentative schedule. Most of programming will be on main TV. I think there's about 7 or 8 hours are going to be on Peacock, but I don't think it's a bad thing. Sometimes you have to have the race on Peacock because they've got to have shows, of course, that are going to be there. But that's all the TV networks you need to know for the upcoming the upcoming Rolex 24. Pretty awesome and really cool to see that that's going to be something that's happening. Once again, cool to see that for sure. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Track Enterprises. As Track Enterprises have bought CRA, Champions Racing Association, which should allow for some late model cohesion as track promoters as operators. Track Enterprises is a multitude company of Bob Sargent, who's the father of Dalton Sargent and Logan Sargent, I believe, and also Spire, and also the group, I think it's either Spire or the Speedway Motorsports Incorporated, who runs that organization as well. This will allow late model cohesion for multiple tracks like National Fairgrounds. I think a couple other tracks were mentioned on there that will be allowed to cohese with them. I think that's something that overall is very, very awesome. Track Enterprises have bought up. I think it's something that has been needed for a very, very long time, and I think it's cool to see the Track Enterprise have made this overall decision. I think it's really, really awesome, really, really cool, and I'm glad to see that they've made the decision overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Southern Computer Warehouse. As was announced, I think, on Tuesday, that NASCAR has added a new partner at Atlanta-based computer hardware reseller SCW, Southern Computer Warehouse Company, which is the official technical value-added reseller. The company will provide NASCAR with access to its products and also is expected to sponsor a team/driver in 2022. In my opinion, I think that this is overall a very, very good thing that they're going to have a company like this sponsor. I've never really heard of a reseller, so that's something that I think is overall very, very interesting. But I think it's awesome that you're going to have a company like Southern Computer Wires, that warehouse is going to be coming in and working with that. I think that's something that's really, really cool, and I'm glad to see that a new company is coming in to work with NASCAR heading into 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the ARCA CO Showdown. As these are the 10 races that are going to be on the ARCA CO Showdown for 2022. The first race will take place on March 11th at Phoenix. Then it won't happen again until June 11th at Iowa, which I think also is the IndyCar weekend, if not mistaken. Then on June 18th will take place at Berlin. Then on June 25th at Elko. Then on July 8th will be Mid-Ohio. Then on July 29th at Indianapolis Racing Park, which I believe is around the same time the Truck Series race, which their playoffs begin really, really early this year when that takes place. then on August 19th at Watkins Glen, then on August 20th at the Milwaukee Mile, then September 4th at DuQuoin, and then the final race for that will be a September 15th at Bristol. The Argus Seals Championship, Showdown Championship, is basically a championship inside the ARCA Championship. If you win that, I think you win a ton of money. So I think that's overall really, really exciting. And I'm glad, again, I'm really happy to see that this showdown is once again returning into 2022. I think it's awesome. I'm glad to see that is something that's happening this year. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. As Kyle Larson has been named the 2021 Richard Petty Driver of the Year in NASCAR. No surprises here, Kyle Larson had one of the most dominant NASCAR seasons in many, many years, picking up 10 victories in the NASCAR Cup Series, which is the most since Jimmy Johnson in 2007. Kyle Larson was very, very fast throughout the 2021 season, was arguably the best driver, not even close, and someone that I think for many, many years is going to be a championship contender and a championship threat. So overall, I think it's really, really good that Kyle Larson is able to win the award. I think it's a great decision that they decided to give him that award. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about David Smith. As David Smith has been hired as head of analytics for RFK Racing. I'm really, really happy that David Smith is getting an opportunity to work as head of analytics at RFK Racing. David Smith has been basically doing work, I think he's been working with The Athletic and also does this podcast called the Positive Regret Podcast with Alan Cavana. And this podcast, I wasn't a big fan of at first, but over the years, it's really, really grown on me. And David Smith has a lot of intelligence. And I think that when it comes to analytics for RFK, he's going to do a really, really good job. I think that RFK Racing overall is building a superstar and a superpowered team. And the people they've been picking up, Matt McCall as a crew chief, TJ Majors as a spotter, all the things they've been doing over the years, I think are really, really sick and very, very awesome. And I think it's a good decision that they decided to bring him on. And I think it's a great thing that they're doing this, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Josh Hamilton. Now, Josh Hamilton has been a guy that's, I think, has been overseeing NASCAR, like the EVP of NASCAR. I think he's one of the higher-ups at NASCAR. Well, Josh Hamilton, unfortunately, lost his house in a fire, and there is a GoFundMe that is, I'm not sure if I'm going to put it in the description, but there is a GoFundMe that is being set up. Josh Hamilton has helped a lot of people in this industry, and all I can say is my prayers and condolences do go out to Josh Hamilton and his family. I would never want anybody to go through that. It's unfortunate what's happened to Josh Hamilton, and we all somewhat disagree with how he's handled the next-gen car, but he's helped a lot of people in this industry, and to me, I think that's one thing that's more important is let's help out someone that's been in this community for many, many years. Let's do that. I think it will be great if we can help him out here, and hopefully we can help him out. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about James Davison. As James Davison is officially going to be racing in the Rolex 24, driving the number 3 Mercedes GTD for Gilbert Kharkov Racing. Now, he's going to be replacing Guy Cosmo. I think Guy Cosmo may have gotten COVID-19. Guy Cosmo, of course, a driver who's basically raced in sports cars for many, many years. James Davison is now getting the opportunity to get in that car and race. I don't know how the 33 car is going to do. I think that car actually was up front in the race, so they're going to have a good shot overall to win. It is 24 hours. James Davison is not going to be in the Rolex 24 in a couple years now. So hopefully James Davison can do a really, really good job working with this team this year. I think that hopefully I really hope he does well. I think that if he can do really, really well, I think it's going to be great for the sport, and hopefully he can do well enough to have a good year this year with the team. I just hope he can do well with the team. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Trevor Bayne. As Trevor Bayne announced on Fox announced on his Instagram that he will be back in the Fox Sports booth in 2022. He will do truck race day and race hub programming throughout the year as well. Trevor Bayne for the last year or so, of course, in 2020, he did make some truck series starts for Nice Motorsports, but in 2021, he worked a lot with the Fox Sports group in truck race day and also worked in Race Hub as well. So it's really cool to see that they're bringing Trevor Bayne back. He brings a lot of insight, a lot of details. I would have liked to see him make some starts in NASCAR this year, don't get me wrong. I think that he could be someone that could have a really, really good career resurgence. But if he really, really likes doing what he's doing, likes working at Fox Sports booth, I really don't entirely blame him, to be honest with you. You can do some great things working that. So overall, really, really awesome to see that Trevor Bayne has found his calling, and I'm glad to see that he will be doing that in 2022, working in the Fox Sports group. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Martin Truex Jr. As Martin Truex Jr. is saying that he is planning to do some dirt races in 2022. There was an article that was released by RacingNews.co, and there's a lot of drivers that are currently looking at doing more dirt races throughout the years. And we've seen this due to the fact that Kyle Larson won a Cup Series championship, and with there being a Bristol Dirt Cup Series race, a lot more drivers are doing dirt races nowadays. You look at drivers like Kyle Busch, like I mentioned. Ryan Blaney's been doing some dirt races. We've seen an influx of drivers in the Chili Bowl Nationals. And Martin Truex Jr., of course, won in his first ever Truck Series start at Bristol Dirt and did not really have any UMP races. But he's someone that I think that it's cool to see that you have drivers like Martin Truex Jr. who are coming out and doing these races. I think that's something that is really, really awesome. And I think over the next few years, we're going to see more drivers continue to do things like this. I think that's something that's really, really awesome. I think it's something that's very, very cool. And I'm glad to see that he's going to be doing this next year. I think it's great to see that he's going to do some dirt races in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the LGB coin wrap. Now, we've talked about the LGB coin on this channel many, many times, but Colin Fern, who works at Brandonville Motorsports organization, the wrap on the car has finally gone into the trash. We all know the story about the LGB coin situation. If you want to talk more about this, you definitely should go check out my videos. I've got a couple of videos. I think I've got 4 or 5 videos talking about the LGB coin situation. But it looks like now that they have finally moved on from it, and now it looks like that they have gone ahead and pretty much thrown the wrap in the trash. So very interesting that they've thrown the wrap in the trash. They are getting a lot of money from that group. I think they're getting $5 million from the LGB coin group. So at least they're going to be getting something out of it. I know the situation definitely is unfortunate. Brandon Brown did apologize for not letting his sponsors know, but it is what it is, and hopefully that we can move on from the situation and stop talking about it, but it is what it is, and that's an update on that situation. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about driver meetings. As driver meetings are listed as virtual, and there'll be no race day pre-race driver meetings in 2022, most likely. No surprise here with how everything is going with the COVID-19 pandemic. NASCAR looks like they made a decision, especially with COVID still being a thing, and it's actually being a lot easier for the drivers. They don't have to go to the track for the pre-race driver meetings now. It looks like that is something that will be for the virtual side of things, where NASCAR will send virtual bulletins out to how they're supposed to conduct the races, which I think the drivers will be able to follow that through. I think it's definitely very, very interesting for sure that it's going to be virtual, but I think it's overall the right call considering how NASCAR is changing, how the sport overall and the culture overall is definitely changing. I think it's crazy, and that is something that is very interesting overall for sure. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about pit stop choreography. Now, Kelly Granda was the first one to report on this, and Bob Poggers also quoted on this as well. And NASCAR is expected to allow pit stop choreography to be at each team's discretion, regardless of how they do the pit stop procedure. For many, many years, teams have been told to do it a specific way, but it looks like teams are going to be allowed, if they can make pit stops faster, teams are going to be allowed to have their different type of pit stop choreography. Overall, I think that's something, a really cool new addition that is coming into 2022, the fact that they're going to be allowing teams to be able to do this, especially. I think that allowing teams to have their own way of doing pit stop choreography, I think that's something that is very, very awesome. I'm glad that they've made the decision to do this for 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Joe Campbell. As Joe Campbell is going to be spotting for Chase Briscoe in 2022. This is on the NASCAR portal for the rosters. Really cool to see that Joe Campbell is going to be spotting in 2022 for him. Joe Campbell has spotted for multiple teams in NASCAR's Cup Series and Xfinity Series, including for Rick Ware Racing. I think having Joe Campbell come in and spot for Chase Briscoe, I think he's done a really good job when it comes to spotting. So having him come and work at SHR is really, really awesome, and hopefully he can do a really, really good job being a spotter for Chase Briscoe heading into 2022. If he can do a great job, that'd be great for the sport, and hopefully he can do really good helping out Chase Briscoe in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Tyler Green. As Carson Hocevar said in an interview with Casey Campbell, that Tyler Green will be spotting for Carson Hocevar this season. Tyler Green, of course, is going to be spotting for Harrison Burton in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2022, and Tyler Green will be back working with Carson Hocevar this year. Tyler Green is a really, really good spotter, and he's done a really good job spotting for individuals. I believe he spotted for Kurt Busch, I think, about a year or two ago. I think this 2020, last couple of years, he has spotted for Kurt Busch in the Cup Series and also spotted for Harrison Burton in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. So he has a lot of experience, and I think overall he's going to do a really good job when it comes to the spotting game for the team. So I'm very, very happy to see that he'll be working with him in 2022, and hopefully Tyler Green can help out Carson Hocevar have a great year this year. If he can do good, I think it's going to be great for the sport, and hopefully he can do a really, really good job spotting for them in 2022. I think if he can, that's going to be good for him, in my opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Bassett Racing. As Bassett Racing is planning to run 15 to 18 races in the 2022 NASCAR Xfinity Series season. They've already got one race confirmed, and they'll be using the 04 for Bassett Racing at Daytona, with Ronnie Bassett Jr. being the driver for that car. Bassett Racing made a couple starts last year. They originally were planning to run the full season in 2021, but because of the fact that Daytona qualifying got rained out, they set it back to those old metric points, and they did not get a chance to qualify until Circuit Americas, where Austin Dillon was the one who was driving the car. Then they went back and attempted to race at Charlotte, and were able to, I believe, also make it the show with Austin Dillon as well. Bassett Racing, is cool to see that they're a team that's coming up. I believe that they're going to have RCR engines as well. So that's something that I think is really cool, that they're going to have RCR engines for this event as well. So Bassett Racing can do very, very well, have a good year, and hopefully they can have a great year with this team this year. And hopefully maybe they'll get some other drivers to drive. That's one thing that we'll have to wait for. But it's cool to see that Bassett Racing is going to be planning to do some races this year. Hope they can make all the races and have the cars to make it. I would think that Dylan and Ronnie will do majority races, but hopefully they can have a great year in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about some of the Niece Motorsports crew chiefs. 3 of the 4 drivers' crew chiefs have been announced at this time, with Carson Hocevar's crew chief not revealed at this time. For Dean Thompson, Mac Weber, who I believe crew chief last year for this team, I think the 40 car last year, will be crew chiefing for Dean Thompson. For Chris Wright, Wally Rodgers, who crew chief for the 45 car last year, will be the crew chief for this team in 2022. And then Lost Allen's crew chief will be Darren Fraley. Pretty good crew chief combinations and lineups going into 2022. You've got good crew chiefs working with these guys, and I think especially with this being a really, really young team next year, I think their oldest driver being only 21 or 22 years old. I think Chris Wright's the oldest driver on the team, which says something about the organization. Hopefully this team can do a really good job being coaches for these drivers, and hopefully they can help out this team this year have a really good year. Because one thing that's been going on is this team overall has been struggling, so they're going to need some help and some guidance, and hopefully with this move, they can do really, really good heading next year. That's one thing that I am hoping for. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about GMS Racing. As GMS Racing also has revealed their 2022 crew chief lineup. Charles DeMike, who was a crew chief last year, I think, for Tyler Ankrum, he will be the crew chief for Grant Enfinger in 2022. And Tom Ackerman, who I think's done some work inside the team, will be the crew chief for Jack Wood in 2022. One thing I wish is that Jeff Hensley was a crew chief for Grant Enfinger. I think that would have been a really, really cool, both of them working together. I think Jeff Hensley, though, is up in the Xfinity Series now this year with Brett Moffitt, so he's kind of reuniting with Brett Moffitt heading into this year. Hopefully both crew chiefs can help out these drivers. I think GMS Racing overall made a really, really good decision, downsizing from a 5-car team to a 2-car team, considering they're going to have a cup team heading in the next year as well. I think that's something that really overall needed to happen. So overall, I'm really, really happy to see GMS Racing has hired both these guys for 2022, and hopefully they can do a really, really good job heading into the season, work with them. If they can, I think it will be great for the sport overall, to be honest with you, for the team as well. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Throwback Weekend. As Harris Liu and some people commented about how Throwback Weekend is going to work, he left a tweet saying that he said, "I hate to break it to you, but NASCAR is requiring numbers to be moved forward for the Throwback Weekend." This is definitely overall very, very disappointing. Honestly, I think that if you're going to have a Throwback Weekend, you should let teams have the numbers in the center of the doors. And unfortunately, I think that it's going to ruin a lot of paint schemes for the Throwback Weekend. I think that's something that is really, really frustrating, that they're not letting teams be able to dictate where the number goes, especially for the Throwback Week. Sure, of course, you're going to be able to have your numbers for some of the teams will be able easily to have their paint schemes look like tributes. But honestly, I think that's one thing that's going to ruin a lot of Throwback paint schemes. I think the fact that they're not allowing teams to dictate the way they want to do it, I think that is something that overall is very, very unfortunate. But it is what it is, and we move on forward, and that is the news on the Throwback weekend. I wish they were letting teams dictate the way that they were wanting to, but it is what it is, and hopefully more decisions can become to fix this in the future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Hill Motorsports. As the second number for Hill Motorsports Truck Series team will be the number 5 car. They will not race at Daytona, as this 5 car will be a part-time team in 2022. Of course, we know the 56 car is the main car. Timmy Hill will be driving that car pretty much all season in 2022 in the Truck Series. But the 5 truck will be around as well, with Tyler Hill most likely driving the number 5 car. Something very interesting, their father, Jerry Hill, used to race in the Cup Series, and he used to race with, I believe, the number 56, and I think the 5 back in the day as well. So it's a really, really good homage overall to their fathers. So I think that is something that is very, very cool. The Hill Motorsports has decided to use the 5 car for their second number. I think that is something very, very awesome, and I'm glad they've made the decision overall as well. I think it's a great decision, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jesse Little. As Jesse Little will be driving a 0-2 for Young's Motorsports at Daytona. No surprises here. Jesse Little will be driving, I believe, 12 to 15 races for Young's Motorsports. We did not know which number he was going to be driving, but a lot of speculation was he was going to be driving a 0-2 for this team. We know that Spencer Boyle will be driving the 12. Overall, Jesse Little, I think, is someone to watch throughout this year. I think he's a very underrated driver. I know the last couple years in Xfinity have not gone very well for him, but hopefully he can do really, really good this upcoming season. He can do a really, really good job with this team. So hopefully Jesse Little can have a great year with this organization heading into 2022. I think it'll be good for the team if he can have a really, really strong and a really, really good year, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Howie DeSavino III. As Howie DeSavino will be driving for Alpha Prime Racing part-time in 2022, driving the number 45 car, I believe, for 6 races in 2022. But remember, Alpha Prime Racing is announcing a bunch of announcements today. As I'm recording, most likely they're making their announcement as we speak. Howie DeSavino III has driven for Jordan Anderson Racing, and he had some decent runs with the organization, but not some absolutely amazing runs with the team. But he's getting a really big opportunity here, because Alpha Prime Racing is a team that I think is overall going to be a decent organization heading into this year. So ultimately, the goal for Howie DeSavino is to try to get a little bit of experience for the future of Alpha Prime Racing. I think what they're doing here is they're trying to find candidates for the future. If they want to be a 2-car organization, they're trying to find candidates for the future of their team. Howie DeSavino has a really, really strong and a really, really great opportunity this year, and I hope, again, that he can do really, really well this year to help out their performance, because I think that's one thing they've struggled with is their performance of their cars. So hopefully they can do very, very well and have a great year this year. So hopefully they can do a good job this year with Howie DeSavino. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Danny Bone. As Danny Bone is going to be driving a 20 for Young's Motorsports at Daytona. Danny Bone said he had some big announcements for 2022, and it looks like he'll be driving for Young's Motorsports throughout the 2022 season. It's unclear how many races he will run, but we know he'll be in the 20-car truck for Young's Motorsports this upcoming season. Danny Bone had a pretty decent year with the, I think it was the 30 team, the On Point Motorsports organization, driven for the last couple of years. It had some pretty decent performances with the On Points Motorsports team this past year. So hopefully he can do really, really good. If he does well enough, I would assume that he will get more starts throughout 2022. So hopefully he can do really, really well, and I hope that he can have a great year in the 2022 season. I think having him in the sport is really good. He's a very talented driver. It's unfortunate he's not running full-time, but it is what it is, and hopefully he can have a great year in 2022. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about John Hunter Nemechek. As John Hunter Nemechek is going to be driving a 26 for Sam Hunt Racing for both Las Vegas races, with Barry Bullets as his sponsor for those events. Really happy to say that John Hunter Nemechek is going to be driving for the team once again in 2022. He made a couple one-off starts with the team last year, I think at Dover, and also made a start at Richmond where he finished third. At Dover, he was running top 10 for, unfortunately, having an engine failure at the end of the race. When I think of John Hunter Nemechek, he'll be competing full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series Truck Series, this upcoming season. He's going to have a lot of really high expectations heading into the weekend and heading into these weekends, but I think that if he can compete up front in these events, I think he'll have a really, really good year, especially in the Truck Series. I think he's got a good shot to contend for the victories. I know that's really high expectations, but he finished third at Richmond. Let's not forget he finished top 5 at Richmond with Sam Hunt Racing, and they're a team that's going to be better overall this year. So I'm overall very happy to see that he's going to be back this year, and glad to see that he'll make a few starts in 2022 for this team. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jeffrey Earnhardt. As Jeffrey Earnhardt will drive the 24 for Sam Hunt Racing in 2022 at Daytona. There will be 2 Sam Hunt Racing cars this year. It's expected there will be 2 Sam Hunt Racing cars in 2022, and Jeff Earnhardt will drive the second one. This is really cool to see that Jeffrey's getting an opportunity. It's basically going to be like Chance 3 Motor2 Motorsports in a sense. Because Jeff Earnhardt and Ryan Truex back in the days, back 2006, 2007, they actually were teammates in the Busch E-Series back in the day. So I think this is really cool that Jeff Earnhardt is getting more starts. I think Jeffrey is supposed to run around 7 to 8 starts this year with this organization. With them opening up a second car, it is very, very possible that Jeffrey could have more starts than he already has at this given moment. So I'm really happy to see that Jeffrey's getting more opportunities to race this year. He's going to have a really strong and a really, really great opportunity heading in this year. I hope he can do very, very well. And if he does, I hope he gets more opportunities to race throughout the year. It's cool to see that Jeff Earnhardt will get more opportunities to race here in 2022. We're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Hillwood Development. As NASCAR and Hillwood Development will turn 200 acres of land near Daytona into a new business park called Commerce 500. Hillwood Development basically is NASCAR's development company for developing around a lot of tracks. They tried to build up a lot of stuff around Chicago for that track. Unfortunately, got shut down because this track is no longer basically going to be hosting racing anytime soon. Among other things like Auto Club, I think they're involved with trying to help Auto Club get that area built up as well. And I think that no SMI is part of Atlanta. I forgot about that. But Hillwood Development is a good company for when it comes to development and stuff. So I think it's cool to see they're turning it into a business park when it comes to like businesses, like warehouses and construction companies, among other things. We'll be able to build around there. Probably more shopping centers and food centers and restaurants will be built in an area as well. So I think that's something really, really awesome. I'm glad to see the Hillwood Development is involved with that process as well. I think that is something really, really great, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about DJ Ski. As DJ Ski is going to be performing during cautions at the Busch Light Clash. Now, I've not really heard much of DJ Ski, but I kind of looked up DJ Ski. He's kind of like a musician. He's also a guy who basically is a promoter for artists and also does a radio show where he's a promoter artist, like guys like Justin Bieber. So I think that's something really, really cool to bring DJ Ski in. The fact that they're going to have a guy performing music during cautions, this never happened before in the history of NASCAR. So I think that's something really, really cool. If like a big wreck happens, you're probably going to hear some music. I mean, people are thinking like some SpongeBob music or something on Twitter putting that up. But I think that's something that's really, really awesome and cool that they're having a guy like DJ Ski come on and work. They got a really cool group they're working. The Pitbull, of course, during the before the race happens. Of course, Ice Cube during the halftime show. It was a halftime show. And of course, DJ Ski during the cautions. Really cool to see they've got interesting promotions for these events. Pretty cool, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to be doing some continuation on the Busch Light Clash. It was reported last night by Adam Stern that the Busch Light Clash has boosted the purse money from $750,000 to $2 million total under that per sources to compensate for the larger food and further travel. Also, according to a report by Dustin Longlater, he says that nearly 70% of ticket holders are new to the sport. First of all, let's talk about the money. It does not surprise me. Of course, they're traveling all the way from Charlotte over to California. No surprise there for the LA Clash that it's going to be that much of purse money. That is a ton of money that is going into this event. I think they said they spent $1 million on this race. So basically, there's going to be $1 million profit margin. And this event is expected to nearly sell out. On top of that, on the Dustin Long part, nearly 70% of ticket holders are new to the sport. That's absolutely incredible. Coming your first ever NASCAR race. You think about it. So many people in the LA area, because there's been so much promotion for the LA Clash event. So many new fans are going to be showing up throughout this year as well. And maybe if they enjoy and love this event, maybe they're going to come and enjoy it. It might be a wreck fest, of course, the LA Clash race. But the fact that they're going into new market stuff is really, really awesome. And I know and I understand a little bit of the backlash from people, but also at the same time, I don't really understand the backlash either to why this event is getting as much hate as it is. Because you look at especially how many people are enjoying it and who are overall excited about it. That's one thing that I find that is really, really awesome and really, really cool. And it's good to see that attendance also is going to have 70% people who are going to their first ever NASCAR race. I think that is something really, really awesome and really, really cool at the same time as well. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jeff Gordon. Jeff Gordon did an interview recently with Racer.com, and of course he's going to become the vice chairman of Hendrick Motorsports starting in 2022. As he gives some insight to the next chapter of Hendrick Motorsports. The major thing that he basically mentioned is that he's been involved with everything at Hendrick Motorsports, from the engineering side of things to basically working besides Rick Hendrick. Jeff Gordon, like I mentioned, is going to become the vice chairman of Hendrick Motorsports starting at this one. Basically started taking over that role about 27 to 28 days ago, and now he'll be working inside as the vice chairman of the organization this season. Jeff Gordon eventually is going to take over Hendrick Motorsports. You think about Rick Hendrick. Rick Hendrick, I think, is like 69 or 70 years old, so he's getting up there in age, and he wants to have a replacement for Jeff, basically have a replacement for him. Jeff Gordon is someone that's going to be in this organization for many, many years, probably till his 70s or 80s, probably till he dies, because he's been part of this organization now for nearly 25 or 30 years now. So Jeff Gordon working as one of the higher ups of the team makes a ton of sense, and having him as a second in command and eventually the person that is going to take over the team here in the next years, I think that is something really, really cool and very, very awesome at the same time, that he's got a lot of insight. He's worked with the whole team, and that's something important, especially when you're the vice chairman. You're going to have to work with everybody in the team. So I think it's really, really exciting and really, really great at the same time as well. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Brad Keselowski. Now, Brad Keselowski recently said and had an interview with Dustin Albino, and one of the main things he said in that interview, he said, this is going to be the biggest year of his life. Now, Brad Keselowski, of course, he is working inside of the team. He's basically going into work as an owner, co-owner / driver of an organization for RFK Racing. And long term, he's going to become a majority owner of the organization when Jack Roush unfortunately retires, because Jack Roush is getting up there in age, and Jack Roush is not going to have as much hands-on with the team, with Brad Keselowski coming onto the team in 2022. Overall, no surprises here that he's going to be more inside of the organization heading into next year. I think that is something that is overall very, very important for Brad to work with everything. And of course, him saying it's the biggest year of his life, owning a team, and looking to try to get this team back up to speed. And of course, they made a lot of big moves over that organization over the last couple of years. I think that it is something very, very exciting, really, really awesome, and I'm really, really happy to see that Brad Keselowski is getting to work with the team a lot more heading this year. I think it's something very, very exciting, very, very awesome. I'm happy to see that he's getting more in the organization as well and working as an owner of the team. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Hailie Deegan. Now, during media availabilities, Ford's, basically the guy who runs the Ford organizations for like Ford's team and stuff, Mark Rushbrook, says that if Hailie Deegan performs well enough in the Truck Series in 2022, we should expect that she will go to the Xfinity Series in 2023. Now, Hailie Deegan, of course, will be returning to the Truck Series on a full-time basis in 2022 with DJR Racing in the #1 truck. The thing about her, though, is that there has been talk and conversation behind the scenes that she could run part-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2022. She wants to make some select Xfinity Series starts, and there's also talk and conversation that SHR in 2022 could open up a part-time second entry with multiple drivers, including Marco Andretti, her, and Tony Stewart. Hailie Deegan in 2021, let's be for real, while she did have some good and bright moments in 2021, she did not perform as well as a lot of people wanted her to perform. She's expected to perform a lot better than she did, and she was a little bit underwhelming. Now, again, it was her first full year in trucks, and with the lack of practice and qualifying, you can't give her really high expectations. That being said, though, this is going to be a year where she is going to have to step it up a little bit more. And I do think with practice and qualifying coming back this year, I do think that she has a really good opportunity to do that heading into this year. She's going to have to turn it up this year and turn up a key and start clicking out some top 10s. I want to see a couple top 5s this year. I want to see at least 4 or 5 top 5s, and I want to see at least a lot more better performances heading into this year. But overall, for Hailie Deegan, having her come back, again, if she does well enough in 2023, I think she goes up to Stewart-Haas Racing against SHR. Like I mentioned, Stewart-Haas Racing is talking about opening up a second Xfinity Series car heading into 2023, because eventually she is going to be the replacement for Kevin Harvick, because especially since she's been in the scene for a while, she's going to end up being a replacement for Kevin Harvick in the near future. So overall, that's what Ford's plans are. It shouldn't surprise nobody that that's the plans for going into the future. And she's looking to eventually jump up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series if she does well enough in the future. So hopefully she can do well enough and get a chance to jump up there in the future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about J.J. Yeley. Now, this story came out of absolutely nowhere, but multiple reporters have been coming out and talking about this as MBM Motorsports is expected to have a second entry for the Daytona 500 with J.J. Yeley driving the number 13 car of some sponsorship from like a company called AgriHex. Now, AgriHex is a Hex company. I think Hex is some sort of cryptocurrency. I'm not really much into the crypto world, but Hex, I think, is some sort of cryptocurrency, and there's been a lot of people that have been in support for this. Now, a lot of people thought that J.J. Yeley was going to be driving for like the money, maybe driving for the Money Team organization or driving for NY Racing, but now it looks like J.J. Yeley will be driving a 13 for this team. Pretty cool to see that J.J. Yeley is going to be getting back in the Daytona 500. It's cool to see that MBM Motorsports also is going to have a second entry for the Daytona 500 as well. And what's also cool is that this means that regardless, the field will be a full field for 2022. And we may see the duels matter again, especially with NY Racing looking like they're going to show up this year, and also looking like the Money Team is going to show up with their announcement pending here in the coming days, in the coming hours. Let's talk that announcement is going to be coming very, very shortly here in the next couple days by the end of this week. Overall, having J.J. Yeley drive for MBM Motorsports, I think is really, really awesome. I think it's something really, really cool. And again, having in the Daytona 500, he's a decent super speed racer in my opinion, so it shouldn't be too difficult for him to be able to make it into this show. Happy to see that MBM Motorsports is showing up this year, and I'm glad to see that J.J. Yeley is going to be driving for this team this year if the deal gets signed, which it's likely to be signed for this upcoming season. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joey Hand. As Joey Hand is going to be driving a 15 for Rickware Racing in 2022 in all 6 road course races. It's already been announced that David Reagan is going to be running a few races with the team in 2022, including the Daytona 500, and Ryan Preece will drive 3 races for the team, the Busch Clash, the Coke 600, and at Dover International Speedway. Overall, this 15 team, I don't know how the 51 team is going to do, but the 15 team for Rickware, they're building a super, super team. This is a really, really good team overall. They're building, of course, already David Reagan and Ryan Preece driving for the team. You've got Joey Hand joining on, who, of course, is a champion of the sports car world. And he's someone that I think is going to do an exceptionally well job with this team. Considering that this car races very similar to a sports car, I think that he is someone that could have a very, very good year here heading into 2022. So overall, I'm very, very happy to see that he is going to be driving for this team this year. Having him on the team, I think, is a great thing. And I'm happy that at least he's going to have a ride for this year and drive for the team. A lot of expectation he was going to drive part-time for Rickware Racing in 2022, but now it's officially confirmed. And I have to say that I'm overall very, very excited and very, very happy to see that he is going to be driving for this team in 2022. I think it's great for the team, and I'm very happy to see that he will be racing in 2022 for this organization. Very happy to see this for sure. 6 races, I think he's got a good shot to get some really strong runs with this team, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump out to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the next-gen test that took place at Phoenix. Not many people watched the test, but of course it was a next-gen test that took place at Phoenix. This is the final next-gen test that was taken before we take the green flag in 10 days at the Busch Clash. Honestly, not a ton really came from this next-gen test, but there were a couple spins that took place in the test. On day number 1, there was only one major incident that happened in the test, and that was Kyle Busch, who spun out. I think he basically was able to save it and didn't get any damage. He was able to drive it back into the grass. And then from day number 1, Kyle Larson was the fastest in the next-gen test, with Ty Reddick being second. Very interestingly, the 23 car, the Kurt Busch and Bubba Wallace, which, by the way, Bubba Wallace is testing the next-gen car today. Bubba has not tested a car in the last couple of days, so it was good to see that he was back out onto the track. Kyle Larson had some interesting comments from the test as well, and he said that it didn't seem too much different from the previous car, which, again, this track apparently the track is very, very similar. It's going to race different at different types of tracks as well. But if Kyle Larson is saying that the car race is not much different, field should absolutely be very, very worried. Then on day number 2, First Gen Motor reported that 6,000 cars had 6,000 people had attended the test. Of course, fans were allowed on day number 1 of the test. Todd Gillen spun, and also Chase Elliott spun out a couple times. Chase Elliott spun out twice, and Todd Gillen spun out once. Early, he got a little bit of damage, but the car basically did not get much damage, which is something that's great to see, as these bodies are very, very tough. Chase Elliott also said during that test as well that of all the places we've been to, this is a track where it feels most similar. Very interesting that Chase always says that, especially since we're going to be coming here for the championship race. I think it's very, very important that the car races really, really good, and hopefully it can provide really, really good racing. Now, there wasn't any PJ1 grip, not PJ1, or the resin compound that was added to the track. There have been talk maybe that resin was going to be added to this, but no resin was added for this track for this test, which I found very, very interesting. And then on day number 2, Ryan Blaney was fastest into the test. Overall, I will say that this next-gen test was probably not as important. Now, there was not really any talk and discussion about mock races. I was wondering why there weren't any mock races run, and then I completely realized and completely remembered that those Daytona and Charlotte tests are really to get up to speed with the new package, because we already knew the package coming into this race. There's no surprise to me that there wasn't one, but I would have think that it'd been really, really awesome and really, really cool if they were able to have some sort of mock races for this next-gen test. But there were some paint skins that revealed this test as well, and some really interesting comments. Daniel Suarez said that this car, he thinks that it's the Speed Weeks. He thinks it's going to be really, really awesome, which I'm really excited to see what could happen from Speed Weeks as well. But overall, I think that this is really, really great to see. And the next-gen test went very, very well. A couple cautions, but not as much happened from the next-gen test. But I think it's really crazy, and overall, that there was a lot that came out, not much that came out from the next-gen test. And now we're going to jump on to the first of 3 major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about the Xfinity Series field. Now, the Xfinity Series field, Bob Pockrass had tweeted that he only expected 36 cars to show up for the Daytona weekend for Xfinity, only be able to race. Well, he said that it's expected in the garage, that it's expected that the fields for the Xfinity Series are going to increase from 36 to 38 cars for this season. Now, why is this going to happen? First of all, I want to say that I'm very, very happy the size of Xfinity Series fields are going to increase. But why is this something that is going to happen? Well, there's a big, big reason. For the Daytona weekend especially, there are potentially 45 to 50 cars or even more cars that could be showing up at Daytona. I think they've already had like 39 or 40 entries that have already been confirmed, and there's a bunch of entries that are still expected to be announced here in the coming weeks as we get close to the start of this season. Another big reason, of course, is for the Xfinity Series, why we're seeing an influx of cars in the NASCAR Xfinity Series currently at the moment, is because a lot of the Gen 6 cars are going not only to the ARCA Series, but they're also going to the Xfinity Series, and those parts are being utilized from the NASCAR Xfinity Series teams. So it makes a lot of sense why we're seeing a huge influx of teams. Now, NASCAR, I think, is making the right decision not to increase it more than 30. I would think maybe they could have increased it to 40, but I don't think they're making a bad decision in regards to that. And again, the reason that they made the decision overall to not increase fields much more than they already have is because of the fact that, again, I think long-term we're going to see the fields reduce, because I think it's going to be cheaper at the beginning, but I think over time I expect the Cup eventually will have more entries than the NASCAR Xfinity Series does in the long term and the future. So overall, I'm really happy to see the Xfinity Series fields are going to be increasing from 36 to 38 races, and that's a pretty crazy and interesting story, to be honest with you, that the field sizes are increasing for the Xfinity Series. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. As Kyle Busch has officially completed sensitivity training required from using the R word last year, NASCAR confirmed. Now, to give a backstory on the situation, Kyle Busch had said the R word during an interview after he was really, really pissed at Brad Keselowski at Martinsville in the second to last race of the season. Kyle Busch basically got dumped by Brad Keselowski after the race, and they basically were battling for second, and they were not battling for the win. They were battling to try to make it into the championship 4 race. Brad Keselowski was a lot of points behind at that time, I believe, and Kyle Busch was only 2 or 3 points back, and Kyle Busch was trying to catch Alex Bowman, and both of them got into a race. Kyle Busch also, throughout the interview, had a lot of really strong comments. So he also said the R word, and that's something that is not something in the society that really needs to be said. So Kyle Busch then did apologize later on Twitter, but NASCAR required him to go through sensitivity training. Now, it's unclear when he did the sensitivity training, because, it did not happen the last couple weeks. Apparently, it probably happened early in the offseason, and Kyle Busch probably knew that he was going to be going through that and having to go through that sensitivity training. But overall, I think that it's good that Kyle Busch did complete that sensitivity training. I think him completing that is a great thing overall for the sport, and happy to see that Kyle Busch did complete his sensitivity training that was required, because again, we don't need to be saying those words. We've seen a couple people that had to go through the sensitivity training for the same thing, Haley Deegan, she had to go through sensitivity training for saying an R word during a live stream during a race. She was mad at somebody in an iRacing stream, and she got really, really frustrated. She did apologize on Twitter for the incident. I know that she's probably trying to change her life around. I think she's gotten out of that family's life at the moment. She's living, I think, with her boyfriend Chase Cabre at the moment. But I think having Kyle Busch go through that is very, very important, and I'm glad to see that Kyle Busch did get through his sensitivity training that he was required to go through. So good to see that he went through that and got through the sensitivity training, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about all the massive penalty updates that have been announced for 2022. That's right, on Monday evening, NASCAR announced massive penalties that include playoff bans with the tier systems. The tier systems have got absolutely crazy, and there's some massive penalties for 2022. Here are the L1 penalties for this. So the things that include in the L1 penalties: team sorts parts not meeting to NASCAR's rulebook that don't go past the L1 things, failure to meet minimum weight post-race and for the post-race inspections, and failure to submit and receive approval of parts. You wouldn't think L1 penalties are that bad, right? Well, for L1 penalties, you have an option of getting 20 to 75 points taken away. 1 to 10 playoff points could potentially be gone. 1 to 3 races for a team member. Only one team member will be suspended for that. And a potential fine of $25,000 to $100,000. And that is just for an L1 penalty. For an L2 penalty, here are the specifics of an L2 penalty. Modifications to next-gen vendor supply parts. Failure to meet engine seal requirements. Major external parts that differ from the original of the rulebook that came out. Anything that alters wiring harness or wiring sub-harnesses in the engines. Onboard electronics not approved by NASCAR, and violations of the vehicle testing policy. For an L2 penalty, this one gets really severe. 75 to 120 points, 10 to 25 playoff points, 4 to 6 races suspension, and 1 to 2 crew members could, and I think 2 crew members can get suspended for that, and $100,000 to $250,000 fines. If you get in the L2 penalty, man, you're going to be in a lot of trouble because you're going to be losing a lot of playoff points. And you think that's the end of it, right? Well, L3 penalties is where everything gets severe and absolutely nuts. So, the major ones: counterfeiting or modifying next-gen vendor parts. Engine infractions that include messing with the cubic engine displacement, a lot of things inside the engines. Engine performance enhancements that includes like nitrate oxides, so don't put like rocket fuel like Michael Waltrip I've seen did in 2007. ECU and EPI parts not used that are not approved and not used, altering and modifying tires and or fuel, and violating the vehicle testing policy. For violating an L3 penalty, you have the potential of 120 to 180 points, 25 to 50 playoff points, an automatic playoff ban, 6 race suspension for 2 or 3 potential crew members, and vehicle suspensions for potentially of a 1 race suspension if you have multiple of these infractions. And the money is $250,000 to nearly $500,000. These penalties are absolutely stiff that NASCAR has enforced. But if you want to know my opinion on this, I am absolutely for this. And why is NASCAR making this decision? Multiple of the NASCAR's members say that they're doing this to save money. NASCAR is going into a spec chassis, and NASCAR is basically sending the cars and the chassis out to the drivers. And one thing I will say, while yes, this is going to hurt innovation in the sport, this is a much needed move in my opinion. And I'm really, really happy that they've made the decision. I think that this decision to have playoff bans and stuff, this is a really, really good decision on NASCAR's part to do this. NASCAR is trying to save the teams money. You think about how much it's going to cost. If you see teams starting to alter the chassis and start messing with the parts, you're going to see other teams see that, and they're not going to want, and they're basically going to want it, and that's going to bring the cost up. NASCAR doesn't want that anymore. NASCAR is trying to save the teams a lot of money, which I think if you want this car to work and the business model to be fixed, because NASCAR has a really, really bad business model, they're trying to fix that. And if they see teams trying to mess with that, they're going to basically come down on you very, very hard, and they don't want these teams messing with these cars. To me, this is something that has needed to be done for a very, very long time, and I'm very, very happy that they have decided to go with these future penalty bans. I think that a playoff ban is absolutely crazy. But I will say that a team is probably going to shoot the boundaries. They're going to go over those lines. Someone maybe from like Hendrick, someone from Joe Gibbs, someone from Penske is probably going to go over those lines, and they're probably going to get a playoff ban and a playoff suspension. But I think overall it's a very, very great decision. I'm glad to see that they've made the rules to enforce playoff bans heading into 2022. I think the fact that they've gone with this rule, I think it's important. Yes, and it does affect innovation, unfortunately, but especially when we're going to a spec series heading into this season, you have to make these rules. It's something that need to be done, and it's a necessary evil for the safety of the sport and the sanity for the sport. So I think it's a great decision. I'm glad to see that NASCAR has introduced these playoff rules heading into 2022. So anyway, that is today's long NASCAR and other motorsports video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel to get Sean to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's get some love for that, and comment your thoughts on today's video. What are your thoughts about NASCAR introducing playoff bans and upgraded rules? Do you think it's a great decision NASCAR made or not? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about all the other motorsports stories we discussed here today on the channel? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.